He wasn't a general's son. He wasn't born into money. He didn't grow up near airfields, officers' clubs, or military academies. He came from a quiet farm in rural Wisconsin, a place where the loudest noise most mornings was the cattle gate slamming or the bark of the family dog. To his neighbors, he was Dick, the shy boy who helped milk cows and mend fences. To most, he was headed for a predictable life on American soil. No one, not even the United States Army Air Forces, expected that farm boy to become the deadliest American ace of World War II and Japan's worst nightmare in the Pacific skies. The story that would echo through the Pacific began long before he ever touched the controls of a fighter aircraft, and long before newspapers printed headlines about an American kid outshooting Japan's best. His quiet focus, his steady hands, his ability to judge distance and timing had all been shaped on the farm, by hunting, by manual labor, by measured patience. Years later, pilots would swear that Richard Bong could sense angles and velocity in a way others had to calculate. Japanese veterans, long after the war, recalled how P-38s seemed to appear and disappear with ruthless precision, as if flown by men who didn't know fear. They didn't know that the pilot who kept reappearing in their nightmares had grown up shooting tin cans off fence posts. By the time America entered the war, the skies over the Pacific were dominated by Japan's Mitsubishi A6M0, a lightweight, agile fighter with experienced pilots who believed American flyers couldn't match their skill. Many Japanese aces had trained in China since the 1930s. They thought of themselves as elite. When U.S. pilots first entered the theater, losses were heavy, and Japanese commanders wrote that the American newcomers lacked discipline and ability. But that was before Bong, before the farm kid who flew the P-38 Lightning as if the aircraft were an extension of his hands. His first kills didn't just get attention, they raised eyebrows. 4 Japanese aircraft destroyed in one day, then again, then again. Ground crews whispered his name like rumor. Other pilots joked he must have been born in the cockpit. Every squadron had its rising stars, but this was different. His commanders were stunned by the consistency, the calmness, the way he returned from missions describing enemy maneuvers with photographic memory. He wasn't reckless or arrogant. He fought with the same quiet, steady concentration he had learned back home, waiting, watching, acting only when the shot was certain. But the real turning point, the moment when the legend began, was when Japanese intelligence started circulating intercepted reports about the American farm boy in the twin-boom fighter. They couldn't understand how a kid from a farm, not an academy, was shooting down their most experienced pilots. Stories circulated in U.S. camps that Japanese flyers were ordered to prioritize the destruction of P-38s whenever they saw them, particularly the ones that dove from impossibly steep angles. Whether the Japanese feared the pilot or the aircraft didn't matter, because both were Richard Bong's weapons. And inside U.S. High Command, something else was happening. Quietly, without propaganda or fanfare, they began to realize this wasn't luck. This was a pattern that would only grow. Each mission added another victory. Each flight added another story. Pilots rotated home. Bong remained. Others grew cautious. Bong focused. And with every kill confirmed, 10, 20, 30, the farm boy from Wisconsin climbed toward a number no American had ever reached: 40. 40 Japanese planes shot down, a number that still stands as the highest American tally in World War II. But that final tally wasn't the end of his story. It was only the moment the world began to notice. Richard Bong did not fly like the others. Where some pilots trusted instinct and others relied on brute aggression, Bong took a different approach. He observed, he calculated, he waited. Air combat in the Pacific was chaotic, fast, turning dogfights where decisions were made in fractions of seconds. Yet Bong fought with the patience of a marksman. While most pilots fired bursts into the sky hoping something connected, Bong waited until he was close enough to see rivets, markings, sometimes the pilot himself. Other flyers said he got too close, a reckless gamble in aircraft traveling hundreds of miles per hour. But Bong came from a world where ammunition was limited and shots mattered. He had one chance, and it had to count. This wasn't showmanship, it was discipline. He rejected the thrill of long-range spraying in favor of a cold, perfect shot. In farm country, a wounded animal running off was a problem. In the skies over the Pacific, a wounded Zero became a killer circling back. Bong understood something that couldn't be taught in classrooms. Precision isn't optional. It's survival, and he had the perfect machine for it. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The Japanese Zero was agile and terrifying in a turn, but lightly built with limited armor. Against aircraft that relied on tight-radius dogfights, Bong refused to turn with them. He used the P-38 the way it was born to be used, in vertical energy fights, diving out of the sun, using speed and altitude as weapons. The Lightning boasted counter-rotating propellers, eliminating torque roll. It had incredible climb rate. And most importantly, its guns were mounted in the nose rather than the wings. That meant no convergence, no guessing distance. A burst from the Lightning traveled like a fist, tight and devastating. Bong used that advantage better than anyone alive. He didn't fire from 300 yards. He fired from 50. Japanese pilots were trained for swirling turn fights, sudden maneuvers, and instinctive reactions. Bong fought like a surgeon, in straight lines, in decisive dives, in moments that lasted seconds yet determined lives. Pilots returning from missions described seeing his P-38 apparate out of nowhere and then disappear again, as though it existed only in the instant it needed to kill. To Bong, the sky wasn't chaos. It was geometry. Angles, speed, distance, measured the same way a farm kid learns the timing of a gate swing or the lead needed to strike a tin can in midair. The P-38 was more than technology. It was the perfect partner for a mind that refused to waste motion or bullets. Where other pilots chased dogfights, Bong ended them. As Bong's tally rose, something began to change. Not merely within the American ranks, but across the ocean. Japanese pilots started to notice the same aircraft appearing in brief flashes of silver and sun glare, the twin-boom fighter that dove harder, hit faster, and never lingered long enough to become a target. The idea that the United States had produced a singular pilot, someone so precise and unshakable that he could reliably down veteran airmen, spread quietly at first, in campfire conversations and briefings before dawn. Later, it became part of intelligence reports and warnings shared among Japanese squadrons. Accounts from pilots who survived meetings with Bong describe a kind of unnerving calmness, not reckless bravado, not flamboyant aerobatics, but a hunter's certainty. They reported that the American did not play. He didn't taunt, didn't pursue wounded aircraft for spectacle, didn't wave his wings or gloat. He struck, and the encounter was over. For the Japanese, raised in a warrior culture that revered the duel, this was alien. There was no duel. There was only the result, and result after result favored the farm kid from Wisconsin. The change in Japanese tactics revealed their growing concern. Escorts began flying tighter, Zeros patrolled in pairs hoping to catch lone P-38s, and some formations altered altitude patterns specifically to avoid the Lightning's diving advantage. But adaptation has a cost. The more a unit adjusts to counter a single threat, the more predictable it becomes. Bong and those flying with him learned to anticipate these new patterns, turning Japan's defensive adjustments into new opportunities. Meanwhile, American commanders faced a different struggle entirely. Bong had become both an asset and a symbol, a living statement that American pilots could not only compete with Japan's best, but surpass them. The press began calling him a hero. Hometown papers praised him as the boy from the farm who now hunted enemy aircraft. Politicians took notice, recruiters invoked his story, and military leaders suddenly found themselves responsible not just for a pilot, but for a national morale figure. Each mission carried more weight than ammunition could measure. Behind closed doors, some officers debated whether he should be grounded, preserved as the public symbol he had become. But Bong wasn't finished. He didn't fly for recognition. He flew because he believed his skill could end battles faster, save American aircrew, and prevent the skies from belonging to the enemy. Yet the tension was real. Every enemy plane he shot down added to his legend and increased the risk of losing it all. By the time he reached numbers no American had ever seen, Bong lived in two realities. In the air, he was the calm marksman who waited for the perfect angle. On the ground, he was the reluctant icon who couldn't escape the myth forming around his name. Men asked for autographs, newspapers asked for quotes, commanders asked for caution. But wars do not pause for legacy, and fame does not armor an aircraft. Up in the sky, Bong remained the same, silent, calculating, and devastatingly effective. On the ground, the weight of expectation had begun to change everything around him. Success in war carries a price most never see, and for Richard Bong, the higher his tally climbed, the heavier the invisible weight became. At first he was just another pilot in a borrowed flight suit, one man in the churning machine of the Pacific Theater. But once newspapers turned his story into a headline, once schoolchildren traced his name in maps and mothers told their sons that farm boys could change the world, Bong became something far more fragile than a pilot. He became a symbol. Every mission now came with the quiet question no one dared ask. What happens to the symbol if the man dies? As his victories mounted, commanders circulated his name in reports with pride, while intelligence in Tokyo tracked it with increasing irritation. But inside Bong's own mind, the calculations began to shift. Those same quiet instincts that kept him alive now had something new to avoid. Not only enemy bullets, but the crushing thought that if he made one mistake, if one maneuver went wrong, the farm boy would vanish in a column of black smoke and fall out of the sky like anyone else. War kills fast, but pressure kills slowly. Bong flew with both. Japanese pilots, once dismissive of American flyers, now approached the P-38 Lightning with a very different mindset. Some actively hunted the aircraft type, others adjusted their strategies to avoid diving engagements entirely. A few veterans swore privately that they'd rather fight two Hellcats than a single Lightning approaching from altitude. Rumors swirled, exaggerated, distorted, sometimes entirely fabricated, that Bong had a unique aircraft, special equipment, or uncanny senses. None of it was true. What was true was that when pilots become legends, enemies study them, rehearsing imagined duels, memorizing tactics that may or may not exist. The higher Bong's score rose, the more pilots aimed to be the one who stopped it. Even Allied commanders felt the strain. Some wanted him grounded, arguing that the loss of a symbol could be more damaging than the loss of a squadron. Others believed removing Bong from combat would betray everything he represented, the ordinary American who rose to a challenge the world thought impossible. Through it all, Bong carried himself in quiet modesty. He did not swagger or brag. He did not give dramatic speeches about fate or glory. He simply flew because not flying felt like abandoning the men who still had to. Yet the truth lingered like tropical humidity. Every mission from that point forward had less to do with skill and more to do with risk. The boy who became legend now lived in the narrowing space between heroism and expectation, and in war, both are dangerous places to stand. By the time Richard Bong's score eclipsed anything imagined at the start of the war, the quiet farm boy had become an asset the United States could no longer afford to lose. He wasn't just an ace. He was a headline, a recruitment tool, a living reminder that the war could be won. Commanders had debated grounding him for months, but Bong had remained in the cockpit by a mix of skill, timing, and determination. Yet the war was changing. The U.S. no longer struggled to match Japan plane for plane. Industrial might, new tactics, and pilot turnover had shifted momentum. The danger of losing Bong began to outweigh the benefit of his next kill. Letters from home poured in. Journalists wanted interviews. The military worked to shape him into the kind of hero the public could understand. But Bong himself was uncomfortable with the idea that he had become more symbol than soldier. He resisted being pulled out of combat, insisting that the men still flying needed every ace they could get, even if that ace was tired, burdened, and carrying the weight of expectation rather than adrenaline. His commanders saw something else: the toll, the exhaustion behind the calm eyes, the survival that increasingly looked like a gamble with diminishing returns. Eventually, they made a decision few pilots ever experienced. They ordered their deadliest ace to stop fighting. When Bong was finally pulled from combat, it was not accompanied by triumphant parades or emotional farewells from the front. It was quiet, an administrative adjustment that grounded a legend while the war still raged. For the first time since he'd taken to the skies, he was on the ground watching others fight the battles he once shaped. Posters carried his face. Articles praised him with flowery language he never recognized as his own. Young men enlisted hoping to be the next farm boy who challenged impossibility. Yet Bong wrestled with an uneasy truth. Heroes are celebrated for what they risk, but remembered for what they survive. And now, surviving was his new mission. America had decided that the legend must endure. Still, the shift created a void no promotion or medal could fill. A pilot who had measured his life in missions and moments of frozen focus now found himself applauded from a distance, held in place by the gravity of his own success. The irony of becoming too valuable to fight was not lost on him, or on those who had flown beside him. Victory had grounded him as decisively as any enemy bullet ever could. The farm boy who had survived the most dangerous skies in the world was gone in less than a minute. News of his death arrived on the same front pages that carried the story of Hiroshima, a coincidence that overshadowed what should have been a nation-stopping headline. The deadliest American ace of World War II, a pilot who had taken on seasoned Japanese airmen and returned again and again, had died not in combat but in a training flight on California soil. His story ended not with fanfare, not with a final victory, but with the quiet tragedy that often follows legends. Yet what remained of Richard Bong's legacy was not merely his confirmed kills or the number 40 printed next to his name in record books. It was the lesson his life embodied: that extraordinary capability can come from ordinary origins, that skill can outmatch pedigree, that discipline outlasts bravado. He never flew for applause. He never sought the spotlight. The boy who rose from a rural farm transformed into a pilot who reshaped the Pacific Air War, not through theatrics, but through precision, patience, and calm resolve. In the end, the enemy never truly understood how a farm kid could dominate the skies, and perhaps that was his final victory.